This is for the people that want to make a difference, the people that want to be on the right side of history.
I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either.
And I get it. In today's society, it's difficult to have a political opinion and to make it be known. This can be due to fear, or maybe because you feel you don't understand what's going on.
My administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. America's so true. Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
But if he can do it, so can you. Join me every Sunday on Backstories, where we'll discuss the top political stories and how it applies to all of us. And trust me, this is not your everyday show on politics. All right, welcome to Backstories, everyone. I am the host, Brandon Dais. I'm beyond excited to be back in the political venue with all of you. It's been quite a while. Some of you may know me from my previous podcast, which was known as Ergo. And while I did enjoy the successes of that show, I had to take a break to focus on my education. I'm in school currently to be a physician assistant, which takes up a lot of time, surprisingly. No, not really, but it does take up a lot of time. But while medicine might be my career, politics is going to definitely be my passion, and it is my passion already. But that's enough about me. Let's get to the real issues of why you guys are here, why I'm here, and that is politics. Okay? On my last show, Ergo, I tried to have a more neutral approach or a more bipartisan approach, which is where I was trying to appeal to both Republicans and Democrats. However, I found that was really not being true to me and the messages that I wanted to convey to whoever would listen. With that being said, I want to warn everyone now that this is not a Democrat or liberal show. This is not a Republican conservative show, nor is it a neutral show. This is a show about presenting the facts, whether it be positive or whether it be negative for either side. Take it how it is. The facts are what the facts are. And I am going to call anyone out whenever I deem it necessary to call them out, or whenever the facts deem it necessary to call them out. So, let's get right down to the nitty-gritty, okay? We're going to start by talking about the midterms. Since the midterm elections are right around the corner, it was very, very, very important to me to make this episode specifically all about the midterms. And more specifically, I wanted to make this show all about the facts surrounding the midterms vis-a-vis the issues of the midterms, without all of the distractions that come with the head clown, Donald Trump, and his circus act White House of carny folks. Okay, we're going to begin this midterm discussion by discussing the House of Representatives. But first and foremost, let's take this poll into consideration, this survey. It was done by Quinnipiac, and it asked the following question. Quote, in general, how satisfied are you with the way things are going in the nation today? End quote. 20% of Americans report that they are somewhat satisfied. 37% of Americans report that they are very satisfied. This makes a whopping majority of 57% of Americans being dissatisfied with the way things are going with the Republican-led House, Republican-led Senate, and Republican Circus Act White House. This next poll, conducted by the NBC News and Wall Street Journal, it found that 41% of American people want Republicans to continue their control of Congress. Meanwhile, the majority of the American people want Democrats to take control of Congress with a whopping 50%. That is a +9 advantage for the Democrats, and I am amongst those +9 point people that want the Democrats to take control. With that being said, let's look at what's necessary for the Democrats to take control over the House of Representatives. Okay, so the House has 435 seats total. And every 2 years, all 435 of the House of Representative seats go up for re-election or election, however you want to look at it, okay? In order to have a majority in the House, you have to have at least 218 seats, which is obvious. 218, 217, that's kind of the midpoint, but the 218 would be the majority, right? This means that in order for the Democrats to take control of the House, they have to have a gain of 23 seats. And this is why. There are currently 193 Democrats in the House of Representatives, and there are a total of 235 Republicans. So, if you do your math correctly, that needs to be a total of 23 seats that the Democrats need to take from the Republicans. Now, some may be thinking, what are the chances of that actually happening? I mean, it certainly doesn't seem feasible with the way that today's society is going. But according to this 538 House forecast, there's an 80% chance, surprisingly, for the Democrats to obtain anywhere from 20 to 62 seats. Now, the reason that the odds are in the Democrats' favor is obviously because of head clown Donald Trump's behavior, but also because most of the Republicans are in seats that are either considered to be toss-up elections or they are elections in places that lean more Democrat. So, with that being said, it looks like there's a strong possibility that the Democrats will take over. We can celebrate that. And that's going to wrap up our projections for the House of Representative category. Should everything go as expected again, we will have a very positive outcome. I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure many of you are as well. But let's take a quick break, and when we return, we will discuss what's going to happen in the Senate at the midterm elections.
They tell us that there isn't enough for us all.
There isn't enough to raise a family.
To live a good and simple life.
They profit, we suffer.
And they're going to come after the good guys.
Leaders like Senator Sherrod Brown.
One of the few politicians who have always fought for us.
Sherrod has stood by our side.
He's had our back.
Always.
We are what stands between our champion, Sherrod Brown,
and the millions corporations will spend to try to destroy him.
And we won't let them.
All right, so we're back, everybody. So now we're going to discuss the Senate and what's going on with the Senate for midterm elections, right? The Senate operates a bit differently than the House of Representatives. First and foremost, the Senate has 100 seats available. That's 2 senators for every state, right? 50 states, 2 senators, 100 seats in the Senate. Okay? However, for this upcoming midterm election, only 35 of those 100 seats are available. And Ballotpedia has identified 16 of that 35 to be what's called a battleground race, meaning that state could pick a senator that's either Republican or Democrat. They just kind of swing back and forth between their choices. Now, the chances of the Democrats taking over the Senate overall, I want to be very clear, is kind of slim to none, and that is unfortunate, but it is still interesting to see how the political environment is changing and why certain areas that were never really considered battleground races are now definitely battleground races. Let's start in Arizona, where we have Democrat Kristen Sinema currently in the lead of Republican Martha McSally by +8 points. What's interesting about this is the fact that that Senate seat that they're battling over is currently held by a Republican. His name is Jeff Flake, and he opted not to run for irrelevant and unimportant reasons that I'm not going to report here. But it's interesting to see that this Democrat is in such a lead over this Republican. I mean, 8 points. That's just great. Now in California, we have 2 Democrats battling out for a Senate seat. We have Democratic incumbent Senator Dianne Feinstein, and we have her battling against another Democrat, a state senator by the name of Kevin DeLeon. Kevin DeLeon is the current president of the California State Senate. And there are 2 very important things to note here, okay? First and foremost, in July, the Democratic Party of California decided not to endorse the Democrat incumbent Senator Dianne Feinstein. They decided that they weren't going to endorse her because she wasn't progressive enough, right? However, this is seemingly unfair considering the fact that Dianne Feinstein still won the primary election. But the Democrat Party decided to still not endorse her. It seems kind of backstabbing to me to do something like that. But at any rate, the second big thing that's important about this race is that this is the second year that there has been no Republican challenger running for a California Senate seat. And to me, that is very, 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 very interesting, but not surprising. It's not surprising because the Republicans know that California is indefinitely a Democrat state and is not ever likely going to vote a Republican senator. At any rate, as you can see, incumbent vis-a-vis current Senator Dianne Feinstein remains comfortably in the lead at 41%. And that's without endorsement. Meanwhile, Kevin De Leon is at 30%. So, now we move on to West Virginia, which is a Republican or a red state without any question. Okay, first and foremost, it's a red state on the merit that it elected or helped to elect head clown Donald Trump, as he won that state by a whopping 42% over Democrat Hillary Clinton. So, as contradictory as it may be, the current senator of West Virginia, or one of them I should say, is a Democrat by the name of Joe Manchin. Okay? So, one would think with Donald Trump having won that state by 42% and Joe Manchin being a Democrat up for re-election, one would think that this is going to be a landslide victory, you know. Of course Joe Manchin is going to lose. Of course he's going to get voted out. I mean, he's a Democrat and Donald Trump is clearly not. But let's look at those polls going on down there. To my surprise, at least, Joe Manchin is in the lead by a whopping 16 points. I mean, he's giving a nice shellacking to the Republican challenger, Patrick Morrisey, who's only at 36%. And he's a Republican in a red state. And he can't beat this Democrat, even though Donnie T won West Virginia by 42%. It's just, like I said, it's surprising to me. All right. Now, for the final Senate battleground race I want to point out is the race that's going on in Texas. And considering how Republican or red that Texas is always, all the time, this specific race should not even be considered a battleground race. I mean, without question, like West Virginia, Texas should undoubtedly always go Republican, like California always goes Democrat, and New York and vice versa. However, when you look at this race a little bit closer, you will see that that margin of victory for Republicans is breaking down more and more and more and more. Some people would attest it to the current political environment. Some would attest it to racism. Some would attest it to a plethora of different things. But again, we're going to focus on the candidates because we want to take out all the distractions. Let's start with the incumbent. The incumbent is Republican Senator Ted Cruz. And again, he should not be having any problems winning this race. And that's because he's a Republican, again, and he's a Republican in a red state, so he should not even be worried about this. But he is. And the reason why he is probably because of his divisive personality. His pure and willful ignorance, and the fact that he's just overall a disgusting human being overall. And if my words aren't enough proof for you, let me give you some footage.
Chris, I would note that the last 4 questions have been, Rand, please attack Ted. Marco, please attack Ted. Chris, please attack Ted. Jeb, please attack Ted. Let me just say this.
It is a debate, sir.
We rolled out a spending plan, $500 billion in specific cuts, 5 major agencies that I would eliminate: the IRS, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Energy, the Department of Commerce, and HUD. And you look at the questions. Donald Trump, are you a comic book villain? Ben Carson, can you do math? John Kasich, will you insult 2 people over here? Marco Rubio, why don't you resign? Jeb Bush, why have your numbers fallen?
I've looked at the candidates. Ted Cruz is my man. He fits the bill. He's godly. He loves us. He's the man for the job, and he will go duck hunting, because today we're going. Ted Cruz is my man.
Are you taking off? Come on.
Yeah, they're going with me.
Hey, let's hop out of my street.
We're taking it.
Ow!
Good jump. Good jump.
That means the next time a jihadist walks into a recruiting center in Chattanooga, Tennessee, he's going to encounter the business end of firearms wielded by a dozen Marines. No circumstances will Iran be allowed to acquire nuclear weapons. And if the Ayatollah doesn't understand that, we may have to help introduce him to his 72 virgins.
All right, let's see if we got some bacon. All right. Machine gun bacon.
I wished I had spent time in the service. It's something I respect immensely, but it just ended up as I went from high school to college to law school and on to a career, it just seemed there was always something else.
This is nuts. And while I'm at it, I guess I should go ahead and admit, yes, my dad killed JFK. He is secretly Elvis, and Jimmy Hoffa is buried in his backyard.
I don't get angry often, but you mess with my wife, you mess with my kids, that'll do it every time. Donald, you're a sniveling coward, and leave Heidi the hell alone.
So will you support him as the nominee?
I'm going to beat him.
Are you familiar with 8 U.S.C. Section 1182?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Well, it is the binding statutory authority for the executive order that you refused to implement and that led to your termination. So it certainly is a relevant and not a terribly obscure statute. Mm-hmm. By the express text of the statute, it says, quote, whenever the president finds that the entry of any alien or of any class of aliens into the United States would be detrimental to the interests of the United States, he may, by proclamation and for such period as he shall deem necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, or impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem appropriate. Would you agree that that is broad statutory authorization?
I would, and I am familiar with that, and I'm also familiar with an additional provision of the INA that says no person shall receive preference or be discriminated against in issuance of a visa because of race, nationality, or place of birth. That, I believe, was promulgated after the statute that you just quoted. And that's been part of the discussion with the courts with respect to the INA, is whether this more specific statute trumps the first one that you just described. But my concern was not an INA concern here. It rather was a constitutional concern, whether or not this the executive order here violated the Constitution, specifically with the Establishment Clause and equal protection and due process.
Now, here's his challenger, whom is a Democrat, and he is a current House of Representative member, and his name is Beto O'Rourke. Beto O'Rourke, unlike any other Republican, has been spending his time with the citizens of Texas discussing how best to meet their needs. Meanwhile, he's been maintaining his sense of values and what he holds dear to him and what he considers to be important. This is something the Republicans can never do because they're too busy entertaining the values and sacrificing themselves for their donors and for the rich people. At any rate, I gave proof of why Ted Cruz is a disgusting person, and now I'm going to give you proof on why Beto O'Rourke is a man of integrity.
The freedoms that we have were purchased not just by those in uniform, and they definitely were, but also by those who took their lives into their hands riding those Greyhound buses, the Freedom Riders in the Deep South in the 1960s, who knew full well that they would be arrested, and they were serving time in the Mississippi State Penitentiary. Rosa Parks getting from the back of the bus to the front of the bus peaceful, nonviolent protests, including taking a knee at a football game to point out that black men, unarmed, black teenagers, unarmed, and black children, unarmed, are being killed at a frightening level right now, including by members of law enforcement, without accountability and without justice. And this problem, as grave as it is not going to fix itself. And they're frustrated, frankly, with people like me and those in positions of public trust and power who have been unable to resolve this or bring justice for what has been done and to stop it from continuing to happen in this country. And so nonviolently, peacefully, while the eyes of this country are watching these games, they take a knee to bring our attention and our focus to this problem to ensure that we fix it. That is why they are doing it, and I can think of nothing more American than to peacefully stand up or take a knee for your rights anytime, anywhere, any place. So thank you very much.
Now, if you look at the current polls, they do show that Cruz is at a +5 advantage over Democrat O'Rourke, and this must be taken with a grain of salt, because not only has his margin been constantly decreasing in size, we still have time to turn out more votes. And again, like I said, Texas is always a Republican state. So the fact that Beto O'Rourke has been able to even get the margin down this much is a feat all in its own.
Stacey Abrams, daughter of 2 Methodist ministers, believes all Georgia children deserve access to a quality public education. And Stacey Abrams, first African-American leader in the Georgia House of Representatives, believes in an economy where we all can get ahead, no matter where we start. So we believe in Stacey Abrams for governor of Georgia, because we know Stacey Abrams believes in us. Women Vote is responsible for the content of this advertising.
All right, so now we're going to discuss what's at stake here during these midterm elections, right? But before I give you the full context, I want to give you one more piece of content, okay? There are many people who feel that local or statewide elections are really not that serious, but they too have some considerable consequences, much like any other nationwide election. Let's take Georgia's governor's race into consideration. Here we have Democratic challenger Stacey Abrams running against Republican Brian Kemp, right? Brian Kemp is the Secretary of State, and he's not allowing a truly fair and equal election. He, like every other Republican, is resorting to voter suppression as a means to secure his victory. What I mean when I say that is the fact that Brian Kemp is the current Georgia Secretary of State. He's a Republican, okay? Understand that. And in his authority as the Secretary of State, he gets to decide who can and cannot be registered to vote. And he's using this new law, this exact match law that Georgia has, which allows him to stop voter registrations for people whose names and their addresses are not spelled correctly across all government databases. So, if your name is spelled Allison and somebody only put 1 L instead of 2, or they didn't put your hyphen in your last name, he's now saying that you cannot vote, and he's not going to register you to vote. And he may even purge you from the voter registration rolls if you are already registered to vote. As it stands right now, though, this has led more than 53,000 voter registrations being held up in his office, 70% of which are African American voters. And that is precisely what I mean when I say that this is typical and true Republican fashion, because that's what they do. Whenever they can suppress the minorities because they know the minorities are going to vote Democrat, or whenever they can suppress any Democrat vote, they're going to do it. Instead of being a good candidate, instead of being a good person, instead of being good party people or having good policies, the Republican Party resorts to voter suppression. So now that I've given you that content, let me put all the midterms into context for you, let's start discussing what's really at stake. Okay, number one, we're going to talk about legislation. Legislation is a big piece of what is going to affect each and every one of us on a day-to-day basis. So with the House, with the Senate, and with the White House, of course, under Republican control, there are many things that the Republicans can pass into law based off of a simple majority alone. However, if the Democrats are able to take the House and or the Senate, remember the Senate is not so likely, but if they take the House and or the Senate, the Republicans will have no choice but to bend to the will of the Democrats, or they'll just face another government gridlock, government shutdown. And I don't mean to make that small or little, but the Democrats will actually get to stop the Republican agenda. And whether it's a gridlock or a government shutdown or not, anything that stops a Republican agenda item is a positive thing for this country. Number two, this is probably one of the more important ones, but number two is going to be all investigations, including the Russian investigation. As it stands right now, the Republicans are in the majority, so that means that they control all congressional investigations. Okay? They get to decide the who, what, where, when, why, how. They get to decide everything about every investigation, and they get subpoena power. So, of course, as you know, them trying to protect Donnie T in the White House, they have given us the most biased, most incomplete bunch of BS investigations that we've ever seen, okay? If the Democrats take control, they get subpoena power, and they get to control the who, what, where, when, and why. That is really, really, really important. And, I mean, even if the Democrats only take the House, that'll be the case. Because when you think about it, there are so many things that we need to see in order to truly find out what the deal is with Russia. Donald Trump's taxes. We need to see those. Because he refused to release his taxes like every other president pretty much before him. And, you know, I just really think that there's something in those taxes that he's trying to hide from us, as I'm sure you think as well. There are also other things that Donald Trump needs to be investigated for. That includes his sexual assault allegations and the litany of lies he tells on a day-to-day basis. The Democrats would be able to slap a censure on him, which would be great, because then he would get to shut his mouth a little bit. Number three, and what some people consider to be the most important, I consider the investigations most important, but other people consider this one most important, and that is healthcare. Since 2016, head clown Donnie T and his brigade of buffoons, which is the Republican Party, they have been non-stop in attempting to repeal and replace Obamacare. In fact, they voted 70 times, 70, over the past 2 years to try to repeal and replace it. Thankfully, they were only a little successful, but we're not going to go into that. Their new aim is to go after Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Here it is. Meet Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. He's a Republican, and he's one of Donnie T's conspirators that helped pass that ridiculous tax cut that only benefited the top 2% of the richest people in the United States. And he lied to the American people time and time and time again, okay? He lied to them because he kept saying that these tax cuts will pay for themselves. You know, they're deficit neutral. You know, it's going to help the economy grow so much that the government didn't even need all that extra tax money, right? Well, he was wrong. And Vox.com proved that he lied so very eloquently. Quote, the federal deficit grew by nearly $800 billion over the first fiscal year of Trump's so-called presidency, during which the Republican Congress passed a tax cut targeting most corporations and the wealthy, which is projected to add more than $1 trillion with a T to the deficit over the next 10 years, end quote. In other words, the Republicans, who are supposed to be so financially responsible and, not add to the federal deficit, they just did it. They did the equivalent of blowing the national deficit up with a nuclear missile, right? Adding $1 trillion over the next 10 years. So now, and again in true, traditional, and typical Republican fashion, Mitch McConnell is trying to blame Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security as the reasons for us being in debt as a country. And he's trying to say that the increased spending of Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security are the real reason why we will have $1 trillion added in debt and not his tax cuts. Let me read it to you this way. Quote, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said Tuesday that the only way to lower the record high federal deficit would be to cut entitlement programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, end quote. So I don't know what's more sad about this entire situation with the Republican Party. I mean, it's clear that I don't like them or their policies, but I don't know what's more sad in this current state of affairs. I don't know if it's more sad that the Republicans literally are trying to finesse the American people, especially their blind band of Trump supporters, by giving tax cuts to the rich and trying to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, because Trump supporters are going to be the ones that get hurt from it the most? Or is it more sad that the Trump supporters keep falling for it? Because to them, race baiting and culture wars are more important than their family's security, health care. But wait, they also want to be the ones to complain about, oh, we don't have any jobs. Oh, people are taking our jobs. But you're voting people into power that are taking from you and giving to the richest, because that makes sense, right? That's the logic that these people have, is take from us because we don't like those blacks, we don't like those Hispanics, so here, take our taxes, but now we don't have jobs. Okay, if it works for you, then it works for you. At any rate, the simple Cliff Note version of the story is the Republicans gave tax cuts to the rich people. They're saying now that Medicare and Medicaid is the reason that we have such a high debt, and they are the reasons that we will continue to have a debt, and that we should cut them instead of fixing the tax cuts, which was funding the government. We need to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, so that way this little bit of tax money that we just cut it to will suffice. I'll come to conclude after the break.
This failure. Whoever wins the governorship on November 6th will have to work with the federal government and with President Trump. Congressman DeSantis, you featured your children in a campaign ad in which you were encouraging them to, quote, build the wall out of toy blocks, and reading a children's story about the president saying, you're fired. Do you think President Trump is a good role model for the children of Florida?
Well, Jake, my wife and I were poking a little fun at ourselves because of the way that campaign was going, and I'm proud of my family, though. I don't actually read The Art of the Deal to my son Mason. He's a great kid. He smiles at anything, but that's not necessarily his cup of tea. So here's what I know. I was very passionate about moving our American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Andrew opposed that. A couple months ago, he said it was a mistake. He said we shouldn't recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Every president for 25 years has promised that on the campaign trail. Once in office, they didn't do it. Donald Trump promised it, and he followed through with it. And so to me, when you give your word and you follow through with it as an elected official, that is the model that we're supposed to do. He was right to move the embassy to Jerusalem. I was there for a historic event. I know Andrew didn't support that and doesn't think that's right, but to me, that was true leadership.
Mr. Mayor?
Confused by the question.
The question was whether or not he thinks President Trump is a good role model for the children of Florida.
That's what I thought originally. I got confused. So, no, he's not. Donald Trump is weak, and he performs as all weak people do. They become bullies, and Mr. DeSantis is his acolyte. He's trying out to be the Trump apprentice. At every turn, he's tweeting him, he's talking to him, he's showing up, he's complimenting him. And let me tell you, listen, my disgust for the president and his behavior actually will have nothing to do with whether or not, if Trump tries to send us money, as President Obama tried to send to the state of Florida to build high-speed rail across the I-4 corridor, and our governor said, no, thank you, we don't believe in Obama stimulus. If Trump tries to send me that 2.6, I'm going to take it, bring it to the state of Florida, and put the people of the state of Florida to work.
We don't incite violence.
Knock the crap out of him. Like to punch him in the face.
I don't condone violence, and I don't talk about violence.
I would have done well, but I would have been boom, boom, boom. I'll beat that. I don't know if I'll do the fighting myself or if other people will.
Maybe he should have been roughed up because it was absolutely disgusting what he was doing.
If you see somebody getting ready to throw a tomato, knock the crap out of him, would you? Seriously. Like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you. Try not to hurt him. If you do, I'll defend you in court. Don't worry about it. In the good old days, this doesn't happen because they used to treat them very, very rough. And when they protested once, you know, they would not do it again so easily. We become weak. We become weak.
And you know what? The audience swung back. And I thought it was very, very appropriate. The audience hit back. And that's what we need a little bit more of now.
Part of the problem and part of the reason it takes so long is nobody wants to hurt each other anymore, right? I don't know if I would have done well, but I would have been out there fighting, folks. I don't know if I would have done well, but I would have been boom, boom, boom. I'll beat that.
Do you plan on paying for the legal fees of this older gentleman in North Carolina who sucker punched the protester?
From what I understand, he was sticking a certain finger up in the air. And that is a terrible thing to do in front of somebody that, frankly, wants to see America made great again.
It's possible you could help him with legal fees if this man needs it.
I've actually instructed my people to look into it, yes.
That was head clown and current squatter of the White House, Donald Trump. Based on his rhetoric alone, it should come as no surprise to anyone that there has been an uptick in politically motivated violence in this country. However, what is shocking is the disturbingly low levels that people are willing to go. Throughout this past week, there have been several attempts to bomb people using the United States Postal Service. I repeat, someone or several people literally have sent at least 10 bombs to at least 8 different people. Those people include President Barack Obama, 2 bombs sent to Vice President Joe Biden, 2 bombs sent for House of Representative member, Democrat Maxine Waters, philanthropist George Soros, actor Robert De Niro, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, former CIA Director John Brennan, and former Attorney General Eric Holder. What should not shock you is the fact that all 8 of these individuals have a common theme. They are either Democrats, Democrat donors, or prominent people that have had harsh criticism for the dollar store dictator Donald Trump. Instead of promoting unity and instead of attempting to bring the country together, instead of focusing on the victims of these attacks, this is what we got.
Democrats are for higher taxes, more regulation, and more top-down government control. And by the way, do you see how nice I'm behaving tonight? This is like, have you ever seen this? We're all behaving very well. And hopefully we can keep it that way, right? We're going to keep it that way.
That's right. Head clown Donald Trump, as always, had to make things about himself while also politicizing these terrorist attacks on the people that dare to oppose him. Let me assure you that any person with even an ounce of decency and integrity would be actively, to this very moment, working to tame the violence of this country. But we don't have that right now. We have a Republican in the White House. But let's talk about the Republicans in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. Certainly, with midterm elections right around the corner, one would assume that they would be out in front of any camera possible to do the right thing, right? No. Instead, what we got was a bunch of Republican bullshit whataboutism. And whataboutism is when Republicans respond with, what about this? Or what about that? As their response to an argument that they know they're losing. The current Republican whatabouts include the protesters that protested Brett Kavanaugh being on the Supreme Court, and the two instances in which Sarah Huckabee Sanders and Ted Cruz were shouted out of the restaurants that they were at and they were not able to enjoy their dinner. I personally find these what about arguments to be infuriating and insulting of the American people. I mean, if we're serious, if we're being very serious, it only takes someone with a second grade reading level to see that protesting and yelling is not the same thing as attempting to murder someone with a bomb. I mean, what the hell? If you're someone that is unwilling to tolerate this violence, please remember to go vote November 6th. I mean, after all, voting itself may soon be illegal under Republican control, and that may sound dramatic, but if you consider how the Republicans in North Dakota are trying everything they can to stop the Native Americans from voting, and how we just discussed that Republicans in Georgia are actively blocking the voter registrations of those 53,000 people, 70% of which are African American, you will come to conclude that certainly Republicans attempting to make voting illegal is not such a far-fetched idea after all. And that will conclude this week's episode. And I hope that you please remember to follow us on Facebook at Backstories US. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at @TheBrandonDais. And if you didn't know, this show is available on YouTube, podcast, and iTunes. For more information, you can visit our website at www.backstories-us.com. I look forward to seeing you next week for a new episode on Sunday of Backstories, which will not be your everyday show on politics.